Welcome, everyone. We'll be waiting 2 to 3 minutes to get started as a courtesy for those who are still in the middle of connecting. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Ryan Heffernan and I'll be your host for today. A few reminders before we get started. If you have issues viewing the stream at any time during the presentation and are using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. If you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We'll post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security-webinars. And all these links I'm going to be referencing here have been pasted into the chat window, so take a look at that if you need them. At any time, please feel free to ask questions by typing them in the live event Q&A window by clicking on the Ask a Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. We often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. If we are unable to get to your question, or you have questions after the event, please don't hesitate to raise them on our Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. If you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place to ask a question. While you're there, please join our community by visiting aka.ms/security community. That's the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, which you can do at aka.ms/security private preview. And while you're there, you can request features, give feedback, review our product roadmaps, or join webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. In today's session, we're going to be talking about Azure Sentinel. Sarah Young will lead us through a workbooks deep dive, showing us how you can visualize your security threats and hunting. Sarah is a senior program manager on our customer experience engineering team, where she helps our customers deploy and fully utilize Azure Sentinel, so she has deep expertise in this topic. She's also the co-host of the Azure Security Podcast, which you should definitely check out at aka.ms/azsecpod. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to her. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Cool, thanks Ryan. So hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon or good evening, no matter where you are in the world. It's actually good morning for me. I'm based in New Zealand and it's 3 a.m. so hopefully no one else is probably listening to this at 3 a.m. but hello if you are, and kudos to you for getting up that early. As Ryan said, my name's Sarah Young. I'm a senior program manager in the Azure Sentinel customer experience engineering team. So today we're going to be talking about workbooks and having a bit of a deep dive into them and how you can use them to visualize things. We're also going to talk about the other type of workbooks using Power BI a little bit as well. So this is kind of serving as a bit of an overview into what you can do with workbooks. There's actually so much cool stuff you can do. I'm not going to be able to cover it all in this session, but the idea is we're going to be able to give you a bit of a taster as to what you can do, because there is a ton of stuff. So I'm going to be flicking a bit. I'm trying not to kill you with PowerPoint. I'll be flicking a bit between some slides and my demo environment. So hopefully we'll change it up a little bit. And yeah, enjoy. Hopefully this will be useful for you and give you some ideas about what you can do with your workbooks or what you might want to do with your workbooks. So this is what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at the out-of-the-box workbooks that we have with Azure Sentinel. Hopefully you will already have looked at those, but we'll just briefly have a look at those. I'm going to be talking about making custom workbooks, just on a basic level, and the types of visualizations that you can put in your workbooks. I'll talk really briefly about how you can share workbooks. We're going to look at using Power BI with Sentinel and how you can export things into Power BI and use that for your visualization and use the workbooks there. You probably know, if you're familiar with being a Power BI user, that we also call it workbooks in Power BI, and that alignment of names is deliberate. And then we're going to look at a few advanced cases, so things that you can do in workbooks. So I'm going to look at some time brushing, how you can use dynamic content, personalizing things, and how you can tab and group between within workbooks. Now, this is actually quite a lot of content to cover for the time that we have. So hopefully we'll just give you a bit of a taster. And of course, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat or ask us later, as Ryan said. So to start with, I'll just give you a quick history of the workbooks in Sentinel. When I say history, of course, we're only really going back 18 months, but if you were working with Azure Sentinel when it was in the preview, we actually just called them dashboards. Now, workbooks are dashboard-like things, but in fact, workbooks are more than that, which is why we don't just call them dashboards anymore. A dashboard sort of suggests it will just show you some stats and some figures, and of course they will be updated, but the reason we use workbooks is because they can be much more interactive than that. So the choice of name is deliberate. If you prefer to say dashboard, just for your consistency or a term you're more familiar with, I say go for it, but remember that you can do more than just display stats with a workbook. Now, first of all, we'll look at the out-of-the-box workbooks. Now, I'm going to swap. As I said, I'm going to be keeping swapping between my demo environment and some slides. Like I said, I think it's always more interesting to look at an actual demo environment. But if you've never seen workbooks before, like a lot of our other products in Azure Sentinel and other features, we have templates, and we're always adding new templates to our kind of out-of-the-box workbooks. So I'm not going to read these all out. I'll scroll down slowly, but you can see that we've got quite a number of out-of-the-box workbooks for our different data sources, particularly for our connectors. So you can see we have things for AWS, for Azure AD audit logs, sign-in logs. You can see we have Azure Firewall. We've got Cisco ASAs, Exchange, F5s, and you should always keep an eye on these templates because we are adding to them all the time. It's very, very straightforward to actually, as it is with everything else in Sentinel that's out of the box. If you were wanting to implement one of these, all you need to do is let's pick one that's not been done. Let's say I was looking at Symantec here. We can view the template. And as you can see, this has already been pre-built. I've realized I think I've picked one that we don't have data sources for because I'm pretty good at doing that. Let me pick one that's actually got data in for this, hopefully for this. Let's pick one that's got some data in. So you can see here that we've actually, that if you have the correct log sources in the template, it will actually automatically bring that in. And then what we do is we just have to save it. And these queries are all pre-built. So I'm hoping you've probably already had a look at these before. So if you're wanting to implement them, you can do so. And like the rest of Azure Sentinel, you can see if you've already got that template. If we go back to my workbooks, these are all the workbooks that we've actually got deployed in this workspace. So that's your out of the box ones. And we'd always recommend that rather than going from scratch, I'm a big believer in not going from scratch if you don't need to. Always have a look at all of these different workbooks that are already built in, the templates, to see if that's something that you can use before you go from scratch. It's also worth looking at our GitHub and the tech community. If you're listening to this webinar, I would hope you're already familiar with all of those sources. And if you're not, go and have a look at them, because never go from scratch if you don't need to. And the community is contributing things. So that's kind of out of the box. So just to flick back to my slides, you can, of course, use a template or you can add a workbook from scratch. So in fact, let's just add a workbook from scratch. Let's just go back to the demo. So if I add a workbook from scratch, essentially, we will give you this very first query as just a guide to start. But essentially, you can add whatever you want here. So if I go to edit, we can start adding new things. I can add text, so we can just add text. The text can be in Markdown, so we can say, and I can't type this morning. So we can do really easy things like text. We can add parameters. A lot of the time, you can add in queries here because the majority of our workbooks are powered by queries in the back end. And then we can add lots of different things here. So that's kind of how I realize I'm talking very high level here, but this is how we start adding things and building a workbook. So rather than going from scratch, though, I'd rather show you what we've got here, and I'll show you one. Here's one I prepared earlier, like in children's TV. This is our demo workbook that we created just to actually show off some of the things that we have in Sentinel. So I'll go back to our slides though and come back to that in a second. So at the top here, I'll just go through what you can see. Of course, I just showed you the edit button. We can share things, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. We can also filter things as well. When we add queries, we can do visualization options, and we can also add different queries, metrics, parameters in that box when we add new parts to a workbook. And then, see, I've shown you all this. As you know, we can do text. If you've got Markdown, you can actually use Markdown here as well. And this is also where you give your workbook a name, which of course is important. Something else that's important to note with workbooks is that we can actually, if I go back to my demo, when we save things, you can actually save them as just your workbooks, just for you as an individual user in Sentinel, or you can share it as a saved workbook, which a shared workbook, so everybody who's on the demo can see it. So that's something important to note there as well. So I will, so the main thing when we're just looking at custom workbooks to start with is the type of charts. Now, as I said, and as I just showed you when I created a new workbook, we start you off with a very basic query that basically just tells you how many events are going into the different tables within Sentinel. Now, if I go back to my slides here, I'll just show you, if I go into edit, kind of what's behind here. So if I edit this one, you can see here what we've got is, this is one of the most simple queries you can have. All we're actually doing here is taking 20 alerts from the security table. So this is a super easy one. You can see here the visualization style. We can set that. We can either set it in the query, actually, the KQL operator is render, or we can actually change it here as well. So we have area charts, bar charts, line charts, pie charts. You know, we give you so much flexibility to use a visualization that's helpful for you. So if I look at this query below here, you can see we've summarized we've summarized things in the usage table by the data type, and we're sorting it by how many there are. So we're doing descending. At the moment, this says tiles, but you know, I could change this to a pie chart. I can change this to a bar chart. You know, you can change this up. We could even use a scatter chart. I don't think that will work. We can do a grid. There's all kinds of things we can do here. So you can decide, you know, really what works. We can also, as you know from KQL, we can actually define the time range here rather than in the query. But because we're doing a summarize here, that one doesn't really matter for this particular one. So as you can see, there's a heap of different things that we can do. I'm just going to open that workbook again, a clean version of that before I start editing it. So I'll just give you a run through here. This is pretty much all the same query, just different visualizations. It's easier to show you on this tab. So you can see here we've got we have all the different, we can do it as a bar chart, we have pie charts. We've also got, we have nice line graphs here, which are great for displaying things over time. One of my personal favorite visualizations that's still in preview at the moment, in public preview, is Hives. So the Hives, I really like because they can, it's, I think, a very strong visualization. What this particular query in the background is summarizing is the different kind of alerts that we get from different Microsoft products, so Cloud App Security, Security Center, Defender ATP, etc. So you can see how many different alerts that we've had. It's possible with Hive to actually color code them, so you can go from kind of hot to cold. So you know, things that are cause it, you know, things that have a higher number will, you know, be red, for example, and they can go to cooler, hot and cold, etc. This is still in preview. I recommend you go and have a play around with it because that's one of my personal favorite visualizations. And as you see, you can sort of zoom in and out, etc. Now, of course, you know, what's appropriate for your organization and what makes the most impact, of course, is, you know, gonna essentially going to be the thing that I'm sure drives your decision on what you use, but it's good to be informed about what we have. So I think if I go back to the slides, we've kind of covered off charts. I've talked about the query that is behind the graphic. It is essentially a KQL query. As I said, you can use the render operator in KQL, or you can define it in the actual drop-down itself. Whatever you prefer is fine by me, whatever works for you. We like to give you options, as I'm sure you know, in Sentinel. We can have line charts, as I showed you. We can have grids. A grid is essentially, I did show it to you there when we were just taking the first 20 alerts from that table. A grid is essentially just going to show you the rows of a table. But again, if you want to just see the number of incidents, or you want to see the top things from a table, you can do things like that if it's important for maybe for your SOC monitoring or reporting up to people. Tiles I showed you as well. As you can see, tiles is again a nice, strong, personally I think a strong visualization. In this particular screenshot here, it's showing the top entities in security alerts. So we can see we have good old victim PC there is right at the top. And of course, that's that same visualization in graphs as well. So, you know, there are some queries, as you actually saw on the demo there that I was using, there are some queries that don't, and summarizations of data that don't lend themselves to particular types of graphs. If that's the case, we will tell you. As you just saw in the demo there, I picked for a scatter graph what I had, the query didn't lend itself to a scatter graph. So if you pick a visualization that we can't work with the particular type of query that you're using, it will actually tell you that. So you don't need to worry. It's going to give you immediate feedback if that's not appropriate, and then you can just pick a different visualization that will display. I personally am not a mathematician. I sure did maths at school, but I'm never an expert on knowing what figures work particularly well into a different types of visualizations. So I just click through them until I get one that I like. I'm sure some of you out there are much better at maths than me, and you'll be able to guess maybe without just doing a bit of trial and error. Here is Hives. Here's another example of Hives. As I said, I really like Hives. It's a nice way of summarizing data, and you can change up the colors in response to the number of results it's displaying. So you kind of have hot, cold, which I think is very cool. The last thing I'll talk about is sharing workbooks. Now, to share a workbook within Azure Sentinel, you click on the share button at the top here, and it will give you a link. The share report blade will come up on the right-hand side. This will give you a link, a URL that can be shared with other people. However, in order to access that URL, that person must have an Azure account, and they must have Azure Sentinel reader access. Otherwise, they won't be able to see it. So that's an important thing to remember, because it's not an unauthenticated link, and I do get asked that quite a lot. Just to show you that here in real life, as you see, when I click on the share button, I get given this URL here. So we do have a link to share it via email, but as you can see here, it says that recipients need access to this Azure resource to view the data. So it's not an unauthenticated link. They will need to have a login with sufficient permissions to be able to see that URL. So I'll take a breath for a minute, and I'm going to swap for a minute to talk about using Power BI with Sentinel, because these are the two main ways to visualize what's going on with Sentinel. So Power BI, if you're not familiar with it, Power BI is a reporting, Microsoft reporting tool that we use for reporting and visualizing things throughout the Microsoft estate. It can also take things from other data sources. You may be using Power BI already in other parts of your organization. And we can use Power BI with Azure Sentinel as well. And if you are already using Power BI in other parts of your organization, it might work better for you and your operational processes to use Power BI instead. So this process has been around for a little while. I'll show you at the end when we have some links that the process for doing it with Sentinel is pretty much the same as you would for the rest of Azure Monitor and Log Analytics. So essentially what you need to do is create a data set in Power BI, and that's based on queries from Azure Monitor, or obviously Log Analytics is part of Azure Monitor. So whenever you see the word Azure Monitor in documentation, you can essentially replace that with Log Analytics and Sentinel, because it's kind of the same thing. Then when you've created that data set, the data set will contain a query, and every time you refresh the data set, the query will be rerun, and that can build Power BI reports. So essentially what you've got to do is take the query from Log Analytics and put it in Power Query language. Now, luckily, you can do that without knowing anything about M language. So let me show you. So if we go to Sentinel, and we go to the Log Analytics part of Sentinel, we're going to take this query that we have here, and on the export button, we will export that to Power BI. So you may have already used this export feature, and you may have exported things to CSV, but if you'll notice in export, we can take that and do it to Power BI. When we do that, you can see here the export button will create a TXT document in M language, which is the language that Power BI uses in the background. So you don't need to know anything about Power BI to get the query into the format that Power BI understands. And then what you do is you'll create a new blank query in Power BI in your data set, and you'll just import that query in. So it's a straight copy and paste in. I realize it's a little bit fiddly. We don't have currently a sort of more clean way to do that. If anybody writes a cool script or something, definitely share that with the community. But you import that into Power BI, and then you publish it, and you can create a data set and a report. So same kind of idea, just a different way of getting there. And there's a little bit of a step in between to export that query out of Log Analytics or Azure Sentinel and put it in Power BI. But of course, if you're using Power BI reporting in the rest of your organization, you might prefer to do it this way. Power BI workbooks and Azure Sentinel workbooks are quite similar in the way they do visualizations. So I'm not going to go into that here. We definitely don't have time to talk about Power BI as well. But it's just to give you, I just wanted to talk here about that additional step that you need to take in order to put things into Power BI. So so that's what I wanted to cover there. So, you know, if you prefer Power BI, or you're a real Power BI like Supremo or Whiz, go forth and use Power BI with Sentinel, because it definitely works. And of course, it may work better for you, especially if your organization is already using it for other things, or you've already got a way of sharing Power BI workbooks that you'd prefer, rather than setting people up with Azure logins to look at the Sentinel side of things. So moving on to kind of the last portion of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about advanced workbook visualizations. So I've talked about obviously the built-in templates. I've talked about how you can sort of create your own queries in a basic way from scratch to power some workbooks in Sentinel. We've looked at how we can export things to Power BI if you'd rather use that. And now I'm going to touch on, and I do stress the touch on because it's a very big topic, talk about the advanced workbook visualizations and the other things that you can do in with Sentinel workbooks. We're getting into kind of the cooler stuff. So time brushing. This is, I think, one of my favorite visualizations. So essentially, it's a way of using a time chart, as you can see on the screen here. It's a way of using a time chart to display data and allowing a selection of time ranges within the displayed data. Now I'm going to show you because I don't think that I'm not a particularly good imaginative person, and I find that difficult to know what that means. So I'm going to show you instead. So what you can see here is, again, what we have here is a time brushing example where we're counting again in the chart below here, we're counting the number of alerts that have come in from the various different Microsoft security products. Now, and you can see here, we're looking at it for the last 30 days. Now, as I can highlight here some time periods. And as I highlight those time periods from 11 p.m. June, let's go for, well, June the 16th to, I'd say that's June the 21st or 20th, you can see that as I've highlighted that, it's actually given me all those alerts, the details of those alerts here in the table below. So if I change that again, it's going to refresh it. And I'm going to get all the alerts listed below for that period that I've done. And so this is moving into, and this is why we don't want to call workbooks dashboards, because this is more than a dashboard. I'm effectively actually investigating things using this workbook. So you can see now it's also refreshed down here, the events and the alerts between that time section that I have that I've selected. So it can be, time brushing is much more interactive. And this is just the start of the interactivity that we can use with workbooks. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what I'm talking about. I'm a very visual person. So in order to do that, what you need to do is turn on time brushing. So we go into advanced settings here, and we have to, as you can see, there's actually a time brushing, enabled time brushing parameter that you need to select. And then we have to make sure that we can export that to the next table. So if I show you here, what we're going to do is go to the advanced settings. We've got to enable time brushing, and then you can see it saying export that selected time range as a parameter. The reason we need to turn that on is because we need to tell the workbook that it's going to export those parameters to the next table. So, so I'll show you here. If it's, you can see here that we've got time brush and we're setting the time range as well. So we're actually setting time brushing here as well as an actual time range. So rather than saying last 7 days, last hour, etc., we actually select time brushing. So it knows that it's going to be more interactive. And then we know that this table below is going to receive the actually receive the parameters from the table before. It's something I recommend you definitely go and have a play around with. So time brushing is kind of just the start of what you can do with dynamic content in Sentinel workbooks. It's basically, dynamic content is a way that tiles can inherit different information from each other. The thing that you always have to remember is you must select here on the top picture I'm showing you, you must select export parameters and allow selection of multiple values, otherwise it doesn't work. And then you also need to set that parameter in the next tile that's trying to inherit it, because you have to call the parameter. Now, a really easy way, again, I'm very visual, let me show you in dynamic content what I'm talking about here in a in kind of a more demo-y way. So you can see here at the moment, my alerts per resource table is actually giving me an error. Now, that's normal. Now, the reason that's normal is because this table is waiting for a dynamic parameter from this tile here, okay? So because I've selected nothing here, it's giving me an error because this tile, the first tile, has not exported a parameter to this tile. So now if I click on victim PC and give it a parameter, it is now giving me all the alerts for this particular resource, which I think is very cool. So if I unselect that, of course, it will go back to having an error because it's not receiving that dynamic content. So again, just to show you what we were showing in the slides before, if we go to advanced settings, you can see here we've got the we've actually got the dynamic. We actually have dynamic. We have the export actually selected because it wouldn't work if not. Now. So that's just an idea of the things you can do. Now, I know some of my colleagues and other people are working on some really cool things. Hopefully, just by showing you this very simple demo of dynamic content, you can see there are so many different things you can do with it. I mean, it's possible to pull in. You can start doing, this is a way of being able to do essentially guided investigations through a workbook. You could set up a workbook for a SOC analyst and they could start, because all these queries are pre-built in, of course, when you've created a workbook. So you could actually use a workbook for a SOC analyst to be able to do a guided investigation essentially through the workbook, which is very, very cool. And again, it gives SOC analysts a structure and it means that they should be quicker and more repeatable. So hopefully you're starting to see, you know, and I'm just touching on it here because it's a huge, big topic, but giving you an idea of the kind of things that you could actually do with a workbook. It's not just about just showing stats. Now, you know, we could take one of these alerts and we could have had another tile that further dug into the alert and did other things with it, depending on your operational processes. One of my colleagues in Microsoft is currently working on a playbook, which I think I'm pretty sure he'll do a webinar on it, or at least a blog post at some point, where he will actually display all the playbooks in here, the available playbooks, and you'd be able to actually kick them off from the workbook, which is pretty cool. So, you know, it is not, it's not, you know, it's actually quite possible that you could have a SOC analyst just use workbooks. You know, they wouldn't even, you know, depending on your operational processes, maybe your tier 1 SOC analysts don't even use the investigation graph. They would use a workbook to triage, and then it would be passed to a level 2 SOC analyst who might use our guided investigation experience within Sentinel. There's so many different things you can do with it. So, you know, it's, yeah, hopefully you're starting to get an idea. So what we're showing you here in the parameter setup is that, again, we got to have this export parameters selected, and you've got to define the field to export in the tile that you want the next tile to inherit from. because if you don't do that, it won't work. And as someone who's forgotten this a couple of times when I've been creating workbooks, I assure you, if you can remember to do it, it will make your life much easier, because you must tell the tile that it needs to export it. And then in the next tile, what we do is we call that exported parameter that's come from the other tile. So you can see here we're using that dynamic parameter, and we're saying it's the resource parameter that we've pulled from the previous tile. So then it will inherit it, and you'll be able to start querying it and doing things based on that particular parameter. So again, I'm showing you a very simple example of this just to illustrate, to get you thinking about what you could do with it, but it is very cool. Now, I won't show you that demo because that's actually what I just showed you out of the real demo. So something else I wanted to talk about is personalization. So that allows you to change tiles, select color schemes, and do other things to make it stand out. I'm, as I've said about 3 times already, very visual, and I think particularly setting different colors in workbooks can be very, very useful for catching people's attention. So, if it's something that's critical, if you put it as red, it will naturally, and we are by nature drawn to red as a color because it's usually dangerous. So it's really, really useful to help, quickly get your SOC analyst's attention or management's attention, or maybe you don't want to get management's attention depending on which way you're going with it. So, and I'll show you this again in our demo. So you can see here what we've got is if we look at this tile at the bottom here, we've actually changed the column properties to whatever the severity is, to highlight it in a different color. So we can see that high severity is red, medium is orange, and we've put low as blue. So again, it's just making it really pop. So people will pay attention to it, and you can customize this however you want, whatever makes sense for you. You might not want to highlight the severity column. Perhaps you want to highlight something else like the healthy, unhealthy status. Whatever you want to do. There's so many different options here. It's fine by us. As I said, I'm just trying to give you some ideas about what you can do there, because again, as I said, we provide templates, but I would expect every organization will need to tweak them a little bit for their own means. So just showing you the rather than opening it up, you can see if you go to the column settings, we can take the column, and then we can start changing up. We can start changing the thresholds and change them to red. You can sort of change up the colors here from red, yellow, blue, gray. There's a lot of different options here, so go and have a play around with them, see what works for you. If you prefer different colors, you may not want to use yellow. Oh no, it's not yellow. You may not want to use red, beg your pardon. If people are colorblind, you might want to use a different color, but there's a ton of different things you can do here. So in terms of making things easier to digest for people visually, so go and check that out if you haven't played with it before. Other thing I wanted to talk about here is tabs. Now I'm going to go back again so you can understand what I'm talking about. We can create tabs here in a single workbook. So rather than having lots of different workbooks or having a huge, big, long workbook, you can create tabs. And I think I can show you creating tabs is actually really straightforward. We actually create a tab. You put a parameter value on what it's going to show. We change that to a tab, and then we actually just give it a name. It's actually very, very straightforward to do. And then you can have different tabs. So your users can tab through and not have a huge, big, long workbook. You might know that quite a few of our built-in workbooks are just very, very long and keep scrolling down. And I think using tabbing is much tidier and much easier for people to use. So if you've got a lot of different tiles that you want within one workbook, I would definitely recommend investigating kind of logically grouping them into different tabs, because it's much easier on the eye and much easier for people to use and navigate through. So yeah, I think I've come to that is probably I could go on and on and on and show you so many demos. I'm not going to, because we could be here for hours. So I'm going to stop there, because also I'd probably like to, I'm sure people have been asking questions in the chat, but maybe we can do a few with the time we've got left. But I wanted to point out to you some other links and places you could look at. Go and have a look at the Azure Monitor Workbooks documentation. Essentially, it's the same engine. Go and have a look. We have some quite lengthy documentation there. We have a full guide on how to import. Again, it says Azure Monitor, but it's the same process for Sentinel and Log Analytics, how to import that into Power BI. There's more information, of course, if you want to use Power BI and you don't know it very well. We've got some more guidance on how you can do that as well. And one of my colleagues, we've got things on the tech community. We have how to use the Monitor workbooks to map Sentinel data. That's a very cool one. There are some other things up there now about visualizations as well. I'm sure you're all familiar with the tech community and Sentinel blog space, because you're here, so hopefully you already know about it. And that is everything I wanted to tell you about. So I guess, Ryan, if we have any questions, we could take them with the time that we have left. If you don't have time to stay on, I'll just say thank you for tuning in and listening. I hope that was useful. And of course, if you've got any more questions that you think of later, of course, you can always post them in tech community and other places as per usual.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, as Sarah mentioned, we'll take some questions now. So this is a good time if you have a question that maybe where the answer is better shown through a demo than answered through IM. This is a great time for it. Or if we just haven't addressed your question yet, please do raise it now. I'm going to take one here. It says, can I use Sentinel workbooks to show the activity across multiple Office/Microsoft 365 apps across multiple tenant apps like SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, etc.?
You can do workbooks that will, you can now make workbooks that will reference different log analytics workspaces. So you will need to, and that's part of going into MSSP and our multi-tenant offering. It is possible to reference now. I don't unfortunately have that in my demo to show you, but we can, but it is possible to reference now other workspaces and cross-tenant things by using Lighthouse. So if you're an MSSP or you're just managing multiple tenants or workspaces, it's absolutely possible to get the workbooks to reference that now. It's actually relatively new, that feature. So yes, you can.
Okay, great. We've got one here that says, please let us know the roadmap for extending Azure workbooks to the Azure mobile app. The old OMS mobile app had a beautiful presentation of the OMS solution tiles, looking for a replacement feature. Is that something that we can comment on, whether something's forthcoming there?
I actually, you know what, genuinely, I'm not sure if that's part of the roadmap. I will take a note of that to actually find out. I don't know if any of my other colleagues on know anything about that. That's the first time I've heard that particular request actually myself, but that's a good point, and I will make a note to raise that, because I'm not sure if that's under consideration or not, actually, to be perfectly honest.
And that's actually an excellent point, is you know, even if we don't have an answer for your question on this call, something like that, for example, we do really closely look at you know, the questions and feedback here for you know, feature requests for part of our roadmap. So please always, folks, raise those type of things because they can end up becoming part of a roadmap just because you raised them here. Especially if there was a link in the comment there that I've published to the user voice thing. So if other folks want to look at that, you can vote that up if that's a feature you also want to see.
Oh yes, thanks for it. I was just about to talk about user voice. I was going to say, if you have feature requests, like put them in Sentinel user voice, because we do, my team do look at user voice, and we create feature requests for the product group from the user voice. So, go in there, add things, upvote things if it's already there. Do check it's there first and upvote it. If it's the same that you want, because we do submit them to the engineering group for Sentinel and all our other products.
Okay, great. Got another question here. Can I create a workbook that visualizes users with MFA and MFA types via phone, text, or app?
If you can visualize, if you I'm assuming that you're using Azure AD. Now, off the top of my head, I don't know if that is a log or a parameter that we can take from Azure AD. If it is, we can visualize it. The main thing to remember about workbooks is that we're querying the tables. So we're querying the tables within the log analytics workspace. So if it's a parameter or a log entry that a column in a table, we can reference it and visualize it. Now, off the top of my head, from the native Azure AD connector, I don't think you'd be able to do that because we only take in sign-in logs and audit logs, and I don't believe they contain the type of MFA. But it might be possible if you extracted some of the things out of the Graph API. If you took that, you could do that. I'd have to check, but you wouldn't be able to do it natively through the connector, that I am sure of, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't necessarily extract things from Azure AD, put it in a custom table, and then the workbook could show it. But I think you'd have a little bit more work to do there.
Okay, great. Is there a way to make the built-in workbooks drill down?
Yes. If you by drill down, I assume you mean kind of do more dynamic content. I'm going to work on the assumption that's what you meant. If you didn't, please write. Look, if it's a built-in workbook, you're going to have to amend it. The built-in workbooks tend not to be drilling down at this time. I'll show you one of the built-in workbooks. So we have Azure AD audit logs here. Bear in mind that we just give you a template. You can, of course, you can amend that. So if you want to drill down into something, you will have to, you can edit it and start putting in that dynamic content and changing it up, because one of the reasons we don't really drill down in the built-in workbooks is because different people will want to drill into different things. So that's why we've kept them sort of more with just the main stats. But you can certainly change this up by editing the workbook, and you could start changing up these queries, creating dynamic content, and starting to drill if you want. Now, bear in mind when you drill, you've still got to provide it with the information to be able to drill into. So you can call some external sources, but that's a whole different topic to get into. So yes, you can. I guess I'm talking very, very general, high level. You certainly can get it to drill, but you still need to get it to be able to provide, you still need the information behind it to be able to drill. So if you wanted to post a specific scenario, maybe after this session, maybe in Tech Community, we could have a look at that. But yes, at a very, very high general level, you can.
Okay, great, thanks. Next one, as an MSSP, can we export custom workbooks from one customer Sentinel to another Sentinel?
You sure can. That's actually pretty easy. So if I go, basically, it's okay. When I say easy, I mean it's a little bit manual at the moment. But you essentially go to your code view. You can download this the JSON template, and you can upload that to another tenant, and you're done. It's actually very straightforward. So certainly you can share them. Now, going forward, we should, be getting sort of nicer CI/CD ways that you can deploy and push these things without having to do it manually. But certainly you can export this workbook and you can push it to somewhere else. That's not a problem.
Okay, great. Do the by default do the workbooks match the MITRE ATT&CK framework?
Our workbooks, that's a broad question. Our workbooks, and I'm not really sure what match means, but you'll know, of course, that we have mappings to in our queries and stuff. We mapped the different tactics. If you were wanting to kind of put those tactics into or map things to the workbooks, we could certainly do that and demonstrate them, but I wouldn't say they map per se, but you could certainly visualize some of those things within a workbook, sure, if you wanted to.
Okay, great. I just wanted to ask another question also. What are some of your personal favorite shared workbooks?
I'm assuming that you mean when you say shared, that you mean the community ones. So
yes.
So one of my favorite ones, let's see, is that's 12 hours. I hope this is now. If not, dang. Okay, so this is actually the Teams collaboration graph. Now, I forgot, this particular demo doesn't have Teams in. Apologies. I would have checked if I'd known this question was coming. What I would recommend is going to have a look at, I will just show you as we go. One of my colleagues made a very cool Teams visualization graph that uses Teams logs from Office 365 to visualize. I'm just going to see if I can find you the blog. Seeing as I can't show you in there, I'll show you the blog post on it. And obviously I won't be able to find it now because, that would be, here we go. So one of my colleagues in Singapore made a very cool visualization of Teams collaborations in Sentinel. And what it does is it basically visualizes who talks to who in Teams. And I just think it's very, very cool. And I think it's a great, it will tell you, what internal users people have talked to, what external users. And I think this is one of the coolest things I've seen so far. I know that my colleague Clive is also working on, as I mentioned earlier, about a workbook that's going to call playbooks. I don't think he's publicly released it yet, but he will. So I think it's that one and the one that Sharon has made around Teams collaborations. As you can see, this is a blog on the tech community, so go check it out because what she did is really cool.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Well, we're out of time here, folks, but I want to mention a couple things as we sign off here. We have several webinars coming up. On July 15th, the Microsoft Threat Protection Advanced Hunting Series starts, so please check that out. And there's more in the series listed on our site. For Sentinel specifically, on Azure 12th, we have a threat hunting to reduce dwell times with Azure Sentinel webinar. And on the 19th of August, we have a threat intelligence automation with Risk IQ webinar. For details and registration for those, you can go to aka.ms/security-webinars. And I posted some other links there too for Q&A overflow. If we missed your question, you can go to aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community as always. And to join our community, you can go to aka.ms/security community. And if you missed at the beginning, I mentioned Sarah's podcast, which she's the co-host of at the Azure Security Podcast. Please check that out at aka.ms/azsecpod. I want to thank those folks on the call who helped answer questions in the background here. I, of course, want to thank Sarah for a fantastic presentation. Very fascinating stuff. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us and being part of our community. We hope to see you next time.